Captain Tarek Voss watched the tiny human trudge across the simulation chamber with a mixture of curiosity and professional skepticism. Cadet Arya Kane stood barely 5'4" in her standard-issue boots, minuscule compared to his own 7-foot Arcarian frame, yet she moved with the determined confidence that characterized her species. "You're certain about this assignment, Commander?" Voss subvocalized through his neural implant. Commander Lorath's disembodied voice resonated in his auditory centers. "The Council insists. They want practical data on human adaptability in survival situations." Kane volunteered. Voss suppressed a grimace. The Galactic Alliance had only recently admitted humans to the Academy, despite fierce opposition. Many Council members considered Earth, classified as a Class 12 Deathworld, too volatile to produce stable officers. Humans were physically weaker than most member species, lacking natural armor, enhanced senses, or specialized adaptations. What they possessed in cunning hardly seemed compensation enough for such vulnerability. "Her psychological profile suggests high resilience," Lorath continued, "and her technical scores are impressive." "Technical aptitude won't help her outrun a Dravorn pack," Voss replied. He could still recall the visceral terror of encountering the predators during his own cadet training, and he had the advantage of tough dermal plating and enhanced strength. "That's precisely what we need to determine. Captain, process her deployment according to protocol." The link disconnected before Voss could voice further objections. With a resigned sigh, he approached the human cadet. "Cadet Kane," he acknowledged with crisp formality. "I've received your training assignment." The human looked up, dark eyes glinting with intelligence. Her skin tone, a medium brown that Voss had learned was called olive among humans, contrasted with the stark white of her training uniform. A practical knot secured her black hair at the nape of her neck. "Captain Voss," she responded with a precise salute. "I'm ready for my wilderness survival assessment." Voss studied her for a moment. "Your assignment differs from standard protocol. You've been selected for a solo exercise in Epsilon 7's northern quadrant." The cadet's expression remained neutral, but Voss detected the subtle acceleration in her breathing pattern. Good. At least she wasn't completely unaware of the danger. "That's unexpected, sir. The northern quadrant is typically restricted to advanced training groups." "Indeed." Voss activated the briefing projection. A topographical map of Epsilon 7's surface materialized between them. The northern quadrant contains varied terrain including dense forest, highland ridges, and several water sources. Your assignment is to survive for 3 standard cycles, while establishing a secure base camp. He highlighted a circular region spanning approximately 20 kilometers. You'll be provided standard survival equipment and an emergency beacon. However, use of the beacon for any reason other than life-threatening emergency will result in immediate failure. Kane nodded, her eyes scanning the map with focused intensity. "What about indigenous fauna, sir?" Here it was, the question Voss had been anticipating. He adjusted the projection to display biological data. "Epsilon 7 hosts several predatory species," he explained dispassionately. "Most notable are the Dravorn, pack hunters approximately twice your mass with enhanced olfactory senses and significant nocturnal advantages." He paused, then added, "There have also been unconfirmed reports of a solitary apex predator, designated Vorkath, in the northern region." "I understand." Kane's voice remained steady, though her pulse, visible to Voss's enhanced vision at the base of her throat, had quickened. "Recommended countermeasures?" "Standard evasion protocols apply. Dravorn generally avoid fire and flowing water. They're territorial, but unlikely to pursue prey beyond their established hunting grounds." Voss paused, studying her reaction. "Considering your physiological limitations, I would advise prioritizing elevated shelter and remaining vigilant during nocturnal periods." A flash of something, annoyance, perhaps, crossed the human's features before her professional mask returned. Noted, Captain. When do I deploy? Tomorrow at dawn cycle. Report to Shuttle Bay 3 with your gear prepared. Voss deactivated the projection. The Council is particularly interested in this assessment. Cadet, your performance will be thoroughly monitored. Of course, sir. Will there be anything else? Voss hesitated. Protocol dictated he maintain professional distance from assessment candidates. But something compelled him to add. The northern quadrant was used as a Dravorn breeding ground during previous ecological studies. Their population density exceeds other regions of Epsilon 7. Exercise? Appropriate caution. Kane met his gaze with surprising directness. I appreciate your concern, Captain, but I grew up in the Australian Outback Reclamation Zone. I'm quite familiar with navigating predator territories. Earth predators hardly compare to... With respect, sir, Kane interrupted with careful politeness. Earth's evolutionary pressures produced predators that human children learn to avoid before they can walk. I may lack natural armor, but I'm not without resources. Voss blinked, surprised by her boldness. We shall see. Cadet. Dismissed. As Kane departed, Voss found himself genuinely curious about the outcome. Perhaps the human would surprise them all, though he doubted it. He activated his neural implant once more. Commander, request permission to maintain surveillance oversight during Kane's assessment. Concerned, Captain. Lorath's tone carried a hint of amusement. Professionally interested, Voss corrected. If humans are to become integrated into Alliance operations, understanding their capabilities under stress seems prudent. Permission granted. Just remember the non-interference protocol. Understood. Voss terminated the connection and prepared the monitoring systems. He would observe the human's inevitable failure firsthand, if only to document precisely which weakness proved fatal on the unforgiving surface of Epsilon 7. The shuttle's descent vibrated through Arya's boots as she completed her final equipment check. Standard survival pack, water purification modules, nutrient bars, basic medical supplies, multi-tool, thermal blanket, and a fire starter. She'd supplemented these with items from her personal kit. A woven cord bracelet that unraveled into 10 meters of high tensile line, a small metal container of petroleum jelly-soaked cotton balls, and a slender knife she'd designed herself with a hollow handle containing fishing line and small hooks. Approaching drop zone, announced the automated pilot. Prepare for landing. Arya secured her pack and moved to the viewport. Below, the lush, green-purple landscape of Epsilon 7 stretched to the horizon. The training moon orbited a gas giant in the habitable zone of a K-type star. Its atmosphere nitrogen-oxygen-based but with higher concentrations of noble gases than Earth. The plant life had evolved to maximize absorption of the orange-tinted sunlight, resulting in the distinctive purple tinge to the foliage. The shuttle touched down in a small clearing. Arya felt a momentary flutter of anxiety in her stomach, but pushed it aside. She'd prepared for this, had requested this assignment specifically, though Captain Voss clearly didn't know that part. Deployment successful, the shuttle AI reported. Assessment period begins now. Extraction scheduled in 3 standard cycles. Good luck, Cadet Kane. Thank you, Arya replied automatically, though she knew the AI wouldn't register the courtesy. The hatch opened with a pneumatic hiss, releasing a rush of warm, humid air laden with unfamiliar organic scents. Arya took a deep breath, allowing her senses to catalog the new environment. The atmospheric composition felt slightly thick in her lungs, but well within human tolerance. She stepped onto the surface of Epsilon 7 as the shuttle sealed behind her and lifted off. Within moments, she stood alone in the alien forest, the only sounds the rustling of strange foliage and distant calls of unseen creatures. Arya consulted her positioning device. The northern quadrant stretched before her, vast and unexplored. She had approximately 6 hours before nightfall, time enough to locate water and establish a preliminary shelter. Right, she murmured to herself. adjusting her pack. "Let's show them what a Deathworlder can do." She set off toward the north, where the topographical data indicated a small ridge overlooking a water source, an ideal location for her base camp. As she walked, she cataloged potentially useful plants and terrain features, occasionally collecting samples of fibrous vegetation that might serve for cordage or tinder. The forest gradually thickened, forcing Arya to navigate around towering purple-tinged trees with smooth, almost metallic bark. Their canopy filtered the sunlight into dappled patterns that shifted with the breeze. The undergrowth rustled occasionally, revealing small, insect-like creatures that scurried away from her footsteps. After 2 hours of steady hiking, she detected the unmistakable sound of flowing water. Following the noise, she emerged onto the bank of a narrow stream that wound its way through the forest. The water ran clear over smooth stones, its surface occasionally broken by darting, eel-like fish. Arya knelt and activated her analyzer, dipping the sensor probe into the current. The results appeared on her wristband, potable with minimal filtration required. She filled her canteens, adding the recommended purification tablets, then surveyed the surroundings for her campsite. 100 meters upstream, the ridge she'd identified rose approximately 20 meters above the forest floor. Its southeastern face featured a natural stone outcropping that would provide shelter on one side while allowing visibility across the surrounding terrain. Most importantly, it offered limited access points that could be monitored or blocked. Arya began the climb, testing each handhold carefully before committing her weight. The exertion felt good after the shuttle journey, her muscles working efficiently despite Epsilon 7's slightly higher gravity. She reached the outcropping and set down her pack, taking a moment to appreciate the panoramic view. From this vantage point, she could see several kilometers of forest stretching toward distant purple mountains. The stream glinted like a silver ribbon through the trees, and several clearings dotted the landscape, potential hunting grounds for the Dravorn packs. Arya mentally marked these danger zones. She set to work establishing her camp with methodical efficiency. First, she constructed a small, concealed fire pit near the rock face, arranging stones to reflect heat back toward her sleeping area while minimizing visible light. Next, she gathered dry vegetation for bedding, carefully checking each handful for indigenous organisms before adding it to her pile. As the orange sun began its descent, Arya collected firewood, selecting the driest branches she could find, and testing several varieties to determine their burn characteristics. One type, a dense, resinous wood from fallen branches, burned particularly hot and produced minimal smoke, making it ideal for her needs. With the basics established, she began implementing additional security measures, using her cord and the multi-tool. She created a perimeter of simple alarm triggers, arrangements of balanced sticks that would clatter down if disturbed. At the two most accessible approaches to her camp, she set more elaborate deterrents, small pits concealed with vegetation and tripwires connected to noisemakers fashioned from her equipment. The sun had nearly set when she completed her preparations. Arya kindled a small fire, feeding it carefully with the resinous wood. The flames cast flickering shadows against the rock face as darkness settled over the forest. She heated water for one of her nutrient bars, transforming the bland emergency ration into a passable soup. As she ate, Arya reviewed her situation. Day 1 objectives accomplished. She had water, shelter, security, and had maintained awareness of her surroundings. Tomorrow, she would expand her resource gathering and perhaps scout the area more thoroughly to establish the territorial boundaries of the local predators. A distant howl echoed through the trees, a rising, multi-tone sound, unlike anything on Earth. The Dravorn were beginning their nocturnal hunt. Arya tensed, listening intently as more voices joined the first, creating an eerie chorus that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. She added fuel to her fire and settled against the rock wall, her knife within easy reach. The trackers embedded in her uniform would be transmitting her vital signs and location data to the Academy monitors. She imagined Captain Voss watching her with his skeptical Arcarian eyes, waiting for the first sign of panic. "Not going to happen," she whispered to the night. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to drift into the light, alert sleep she'd perfected during previous wilderness training. The predator calls continued, but they remained distant, for now. In the monitoring station orbiting Epsilon 7, Captain Tarek Voss observed the human's life signs with growing interest. Despite the Dravorn vocalizations, which had triggered elevated stress responses in most cadets during their assessments, Kane's vital signs showed only moderate alertness, rather than fear. Her preparations had been surprisingly thorough, particularly her use of natural alarm systems. Perhaps there was more to these humans than the Council realized. Still, this was only the first night. The real challenges of Epsilon 7 had yet to reveal themselves. Dawn arrived with a chorus of chittering sounds as the diurnal creatures of Epsilon 7 began their day. Arya woke instantly, her senses cataloging her surroundings before she opened her eyes. The fire had burned down to embers, but her perimeter remained undisturbed. She stretched carefully, working out the stiffness from sleeping against stone, and rekindled the fire to prepare a morning meal. As she ate, Arya planned her day. Water was secured, and her position defensible, but food would eventually become an issue. The nutrient bars would last the full assessment period, but supplementing them would demonstrate resource utilization, a key evaluation metric. She extinguished her fire carefully, leaving the embers accessible for quick rekindling, and secured her camp. With her knife, multi-tool, and collection containers ready, she descended to the forest floor to begin foraging. The stream provided her first opportunity. The eel-like creatures she'd observed proved numerous in the deeper pools. After analyzing their biological composition and confirming compatibility with human digestion, Arya fashioned a simple spear from a straight branch, sharpened and hardened in her fire. Within an hour, she had captured 3 of the creatures, each approximately 20 centimeters long. She cleaned them by the water's edge, noting their unusual double spine and translucent organs. The flesh was firm and pale blue, distinctly alien, but the analyzer confirmed high protein content and minimal toxicity. She packed them carefully for cooking later. Moving deeper into the forest, Arya collected various plant specimens, scanning each for nutritional value and potential toxins. Several proved edible, including a tuber-like growth with starchy flesh and a small fruit with tough exterior but sweet pulp. She documented each find using her wristband, knowing the data would factor into her assessment. By midday, the temperature had risen considerably. The humid air clung to her skin as she worked, and she paused regularly to hydrate. During one such break, a sudden silence fell over the forest, the background noise of small creatures abruptly ceasing. Arya froze. Her senses heightened. Something had disturbed the natural rhythm of the environment. She lowered herself slowly, concealing her position behind a fallen tree covered in moss-like growth. The silence stretched for nearly a minute before a new sound emerged. A low, rumbling growl followed by the soft impact of padded feet on the forest floor. Through a gap in the vegetation, Arya caught her first glimpse of a Dravorn. The creature moved with fluid grace on 6 limbs, its body low to the ground and covered in sleek, dark fur that shimmered with iridescent highlights. Its elongated head featured multiple sensory organs, flanking a prominent snout, and Arya could see powerful muscles rippling beneath its pelt. Most concerning were the curved talons extending from each paw, natural weapons evolved for tearing prey apart. A second Dravorn appeared behind the first, then a third and fourth. They moved in coordinated formation, communicating through subtle vocalizations and body language. Arya remained perfectly still, controlling her breathing and heart rate to minimize detectable signs of her presence. The pack passed within 10 meters of her position, apparently following another scent trail. Once they disappeared into the undergrowth, the forest's ambient sounds gradually resumed. Arya waited an additional 5 minutes before moving, then carefully began making her way back toward her camp, taking an indirect route to avoid leaving an obvious trail. The encounter had provided valuable intelligence. The Dravorn were indeed formidable, larger than the briefing had suggested, and clearly intelligent hunters. Their sensory capabilities seemed primarily olfactory, which gave her options for countermeasures. Most importantly, she now understood their movement patterns better, which would help her avoid future encounters. Reaching her camp by mid-afternoon, Arya implemented additional security measures based on her observations. She created several false scent trails using the juice from strongly aromatic plants, leading away from her actual position. Around the perimeter of her camp, she placed bundles of the same plants, hoping their strong smell would mask her human scent. As the day progressed into evening, Arya prepared her captured fish over the fire. The meat cooked to a pale lavender color and tasted surprisingly pleasant, similar to freshwater fish from Earth, but with a slight sweetness. She supplemented the meal with the edible plants she'd gathered, creating a satisfying dinner that she documented for her assessment records. Night fell more quickly than on Earth, the orange sun dipping below the horizon with little twilight. Arya built up her fire and settled in for another vigilant night, replaying the Dravorn encounter in her mind and refining her strategies. The predator calls began earlier this evening, and noticeably closer to her position. The pack she'd observed had likely detected traces of her presence in their territory. Tomorrow would require even greater caution. In the orbital monitoring station, Captain Voss reviewed the day's data with growing fascination. The human had not only maintained her position, but had successfully identified food sources and implemented surprisingly effective countermeasures after her Dravorn encounter. Most cadets, even those from predator species, exhibited significant stress responses after their first Dravorn sighting. Kane's vitals had spiked briefly, but stabilized remarkably quickly. Her adaptation rate exceeds predictions, he noted in his official log. Continuing observation with heightened interest. Commander Loreth's reply came promptly. The Council will be pleased with the data. Maintain monitoring protocols and prepare contingency extraction, if necessary. Voss acknowledged the order, though he was beginning to suspect contingency extraction might not be required. The human cadet was proving unexpectedly resourceful. The second night passed without direct incident, though the Dravorn calls circled her position with concerning regularity. Arya slept in short intervals, maintaining her fire and remaining alert to any perimeter breaches. By morning, she felt the slight edge of fatigue, but nothing that would impair her performance. After a quick breakfast of remaining fish and nutrient bar, Arya decided to scout the area more thoroughly. If the Dravorn were establishing a hunting pattern around her camp, she needed to understand their movements better. She secured her sight, doused the fire, and descended to the forest floor with minimal equipment, only her knife, water, a small ration, and her emergency beacon. Moving with careful precision, Arya established a circular reconnaissance route approximately 1 kilometer from her camp. She marked her path subtly, placing small arrangements of stones or bent twigs that only she would recognize, while avoiding creating an obvious trail. The forest felt different today, tenser, somehow, as if the ecosystem itself sensed impending conflict. The small creatures were less visible, and even the ambient sounds seemed muted. Arya proceeded with heightened caution, pausing frequently to listen and observe. Midway through her circuit, she discovered clear evidence of Dravorn activity, a disturbed area where the soil showed multiple sets of tracks and vegetation had been trampled. Following the signs carefully, she discovered the remains of a recent kill, some native herbivore reduced to scattered bones and hide. The site was fresh, likely from the previous night's hunt. Arya studied the scene methodically, noting the attack pattern evident in the spoor. The Dravorn hunted like earthwolves, using coordinated tactics to separate prey from groups and drive them toward waiting pack members. This confirmed her strategy of maintaining elevated, defensible positions whenever possible. As she continued her reconnaissance, Arya became aware of a subtle shift in the forest's energy. The silence had deepened, but differently than during her previous Dravorn encounter. This felt more focused. She slowed her pace, every sense straining for information. A faint sound reached her, the soft whimper of a young creature in distress. Arya hesitated, conscious of potential traps, but her curiosity and ingrained compassion overrode caution. She moved toward the sound with careful steps. In a small clearing ahead, she discovered the source. Two small, furry creatures huddled together at the base of a tree. They resembled the Dravorn in basic body structure, but were clearly juveniles of another species, perhaps a related omnivore rather than a dedicated predator. Their oversized eyes and trembling forms triggered an instinctive protective response that Arya couldn't entirely suppress. Movement at the clearing's edge caught her attention. A Dravorn emerged from the underbrush, its attention fixed on the young creatures. Two more flanked it, cutting off escape routes with practiced efficiency. The hunt was on, and the outcome seemed inevitable. Arya knew she should retreat. Non-interference in native ecosystems was a foundational principle of alliance training. Yet something in her rebelled at the thought of watching these defenseless creatures torn apart. More practically, she recognized that the Dravorn would be distracted during their hunt, potentially giving her valuable information about their capabilities. Decision made. She reached into her pocket for the fire starter. The multi-purpose tool could generate an intense flame, hot enough to ignite most materials. She quickly gathered a handful of dry vegetation, compressed it into a tight bundle, and added a small amount of the petroleum jelly from her personal supplies. The resulting torch would burn hot and bright for several minutes. The lead Dravorn had begun its stalking approach toward the juveniles, which huddled closer together, their whimpers intensifying. Arya calculated her moment, then struck the fire starter against her prepared torch. It caught immediately, flaring with surprising intensity. With a practiced motion, she hurled the burning torch into the clearing, where it landed between the Dravorn and their intended prey. The predators recoiled instinctively from the sudden flame, their hunting focus disrupted. Arya followed immediately with a series of sharp, loud whistles, a disruptive sound pattern that further confused the hunters. The distraction worked. The Dravorn hesitated, their coordinated attack broken. The juveniles, sensing opportunity, scrambled toward the forest edge opposite the predators. One Dravorn started to pursue, but Arya emerged partially from cover, making herself visible while waving a hastily lit second torch. The bold move startled the predators. They clearly recognized her as a novel entity, something outside their normal hunting parameters. Their hesitation lasted only moments, but it was enough for the juvenile creatures to disappear into the undergrowth. The Dravorn pack turned its collective attention toward Arya. Time to leave. She backed away slowly, maintaining her visible torch as a barrier. The Dravorn followed cautiously, clearly intrigued by this strange new presence in their territory, but wary of the fire. Arya led them gradually away from both her camp and the escaped juveniles, maintaining enough distance to avoid immediate danger. When she reached a small stream crossing, Arya made her move. She hurled the torch across the water, momentarily drawing the Dravorn's attention, then quickly waded upstream, using the flowing water to break her scent trail. After 50 meters, she exited the water and made a careful path back toward her camp, using every technique she knew to minimize trackable signs of her passage. The encounter left her heart pounding but mind sharp. She had confirmed several crucial pieces of information. The Dravorn feared fire, as expected. They communicated sophisticated tactical information among pack members, and they exhibited cautious curiosity toward unknown entities rather than immediate aggression. All useful data for surviving the remainder of her assessment period. More troubling was her decision to interfere. The Academy prioritized non-intervention in native ecological processes. Her justification about gathering behavioral data was thin at best. If questioned, she would need to account for her actions. Reaching her camp without further incident, Arya climbed to her sheltered position and immediately reinforced her defenses. She built up the fire, larger than previous nights, and prepared additional torches that could be quickly lit if needed. The Dravorn had her scent now, and while the water crossing would confuse them temporarily, they would eventually track her to this location. As darkness fell, Arya maintained heightened vigilance. The predator calls began as usual, but with a different pattern. More frequent exchanges between pack members, suggesting coordinated movement. They were hunting with purpose tonight, and she strongly suspected she had become their primary target. In the orbital monitoring station, Captain Voss watched the recorded feed of Kane's encounter with mounting disbelief. "She deliberately revealed herself to the Dravorn," he muttered, reviewing the footage again. "To save native juveniles." Commander Lorath's holographic presence shimmered beside him. "A violation of non-interference protocols." "Yes, but an illuminating one." Voss replayed the moment when Kane emerged with her improvised torch. "Look at her tactical approach. She created distance between the juveniles and the Dravorn, then led the predators away from both her camp and the escape route. There's sophisticated thinking here. The Council will want to understand her motivation." Voss considered this. The human exhibited protective behavior toward vulnerable creatures, consistent with their species' social patterns. More interesting is how effectively she executed the intervention. She's demonstrating adaptive problem-solving under pressure. "Continue monitoring," Lorath ordered. "If the Dravorn locate her camp, be prepared for extraction." "Understood." Voss ended the transmission but continued studying the human's data. Her vitals showed elevated alertness, but not panic, even when directly confronting multiple Dravorn. The species continued to surprise him. The night deepened on Epsilon 7's surface. Arya maintained her vigilance, tracking the Dravorn calls as they circled ever closer to her position. Her perimeter alarms remained untriggered, but the predators were clearly aware of her general location. They were being cautious, studying this new element in their territory before committing to an attack. Near midnight, a disturbance at the forest edge below caught her attention. A Dravorn emerged into the moonlight, its iridescent fur gleaming as it tested the air with its sensory organs. Two more appeared flanking it, then another pair behind. 5 in total, a larger group than she'd observed previously. They prowled the area below her outcropping, occasionally looking up toward her position, but not attempting the climb. The fire was keeping them at bay for now, but Arya could read their behavior clearly enough. They were memorizing her location, assessing approaches, and communicating findings to each other through subtle vocalizations. They were planning, and that meant tomorrow would bring a coordinated attack. Arya fed her fire and reviewed her options. She could relocate, but finding another defensible position in darkness would be challenging. The Academy would extract her if she used her emergency beacon, but that would constitute failure. Neither option appealed to her stubborn determination. Instead, she began devising countermeasures based on what she'd learned about Dravorn behavior. The predators were intelligent but followed predictable hunting patterns. They relied heavily on scent tracking and pack coordination. Most importantly, they were cautious around fire and unknown threats. She could use all of this. Working quietly through the night, Arya prepared. She fashioned additional torches and positioned them strategically around her camp. Using cord from her supplies, she created a simple pulley system that would allow her to ignite and control multiple fire sources from her central position. She prepared several bundles of particularly aromatic plants, wrapping them in leaves to preserve their potency until needed. Dawn approached with no further Dravorn appearances, but Arya remained certain they would return. She allowed herself a brief rest as the first light broke over the horizon, knowing she would need her strength for the coming confrontation. She was awakened abruptly by the clatter of one of her perimeter alarms. Instantly alert, Arya assessed her surroundings. The sun had fully risen, illuminating the forest below her position. No Dravorn were immediately visible, but the disturbed alarm indicated something had approached from the western edge of her camp. Movement caught her eye, not from below, but along the ridge to her right. Somehow, a Dravorn had circled behind her position and was navigating the steep terrain to approach from an unexpected angle. As she turned to face this threat, another alarm triggered to her left. They were coordinating a multi-directional assault, attempting to divide her attention. Clever. Arya quickly ignited her prepared torches, creating a semicircle of flame between her and the approaching predators. The Dravorn on the ridge hesitated at the sight of fire, but continued its advance with determined purpose. A glimpse of movement below confirmed that others were now attempting the direct climb to her outcropping. 5 simultaneous approach vectors. The entire pack had committed to this hunt. Arya felt a moment of genuine admiration for their tactical coordination before focusing on her defense. She deployed her first countermeasure, crushing one of the aromatic plant bundles and casting it toward the Dravorn on the ridge. The plant released a potent oil that ignited in the torch flame, creating a sudden flash of fire and a cloud of pungent smoke. The Dravorn recoiled, temporarily blinded and confused by the sensory overload. Taking advantage of the moment, Arya used her pulley system to drop a burning torch onto the path below, temporarily blocking the direct approach. She repeated the technique on her left flank, creating a barrier of flames that forced the Dravorn to retreat or find alternative routes. For several minutes, this stalemate held. The Dravorn tested her defenses repeatedly, but withdrew when confronted with fire. Arya maintained constant movement, monitoring all approach vectors and deploying her countermeasures strategically to conserve resources. Then, the situation changed dramatically. A new sound echoed through the forest, a deep, reverberating roar unlike the Dravorn vocalizations. The effect on the predator pack was immediate. They froze in place, their attention shifting toward the sound source. A second roar, closer this time, sent the Dravorn into visible agitation. The one on the ridge abandoned its attack position entirely, scrambling back down toward the forest floor. Within moments, the entire pack had retreated, disappearing into the undergrowth with uncharacteristic haste. Arya maintained her defensive posture, unsure what had triggered this sudden withdrawal. The answer emerged from the forest edge below, a massive figure moving with deliberate, powerful strides. The Vorkath. It had to be. The solitary apex predator mentioned in her briefing, but considered unlikely to encounter. The creature stood nearly 3 meters tall, on 4 muscular limbs, its body covered in articulated plates that resembled both scales and armor. Its elongated head featured multiple rows of sensory organs and a jaw structure that could clearly deliver devastating force. Most disconcerting was the evident intelligence in its movement. Unlike the Dravorn's coordinated but instinctive hunting patterns, the Vorkath surveyed the scene with calculating purpose. It studied Arya's position, tested the air with specialized sensory appendages, and began a methodical approach toward the ridge. This was a genuine crisis. Arya's countermeasures had been designed for the Dravorn, a creature she outmatched in intelligence, if not physical capability. The Vorkath represented an entirely different category of threat. Its size and evident power would make physical deterrence largely ineffective, and its predatory intelligence suggested it wouldn't be easily confused by diversionary tactics. For the first time since landing on Epsilon 7, Arya felt the cold touch of fear. Her hand moved unconsciously toward the emergency beacon at her belt. Activating it would bring immediate extraction, and assessment failure. She hesitated, strategic mind racing through alternatives. In the monitoring station, Captain Voss watched the Vorkath's appearance with growing alarm. "Commander, we have a Vorkath approaching Kane's position. Recommend immediate extraction." Lorath's response was measured. The assessment parameters include indigenous predator encounters. Has the human activated her emergency beacon? Negative. But the Vorkath represents a threat level beyond standard assessment parameters. No cadet has directly encountered one during training. Monitor the situation. Prepare for emergency extraction if Kane activates her beacon, or if her vital signs indicate life-threatening distress. Voss frowned at the commander's seemingly callous approach, but orders were orders. He intensified his observation of Kane's biometric data, ready to override protocol if necessary. The human's vital signs showed elevated stress, but remained within functional parameters. She hadn't panicked, yet. On the surface, Arya watched the Vorkath begin its climb toward her position. Its powerful limbs easily navigated terrain that had slowed the Dravorn, and it seemed undeterred by her fire barriers. She needed a new strategy, immediately. Thinking rapidly, Arya inventoried her remaining resources: standard equipment, partially depleted, personal items, the surrounding environment, the terrain itself. The terrain. Her gaze swept the ridgeline, recognizing features she'd previously noted, but not considered tactically. Approximately 30 meters to her east, the ridge narrowed significantly before dropping away into a steep ravine. The path along that section was barely a meter wide, a natural bottleneck. If she could lure the Vorkath to that point and destabilize the path beneath it, the creature's considerable weight might do the rest. A desperate plan, but with limited options, it was her best chance. Arya gathered her essential equipment with swift efficiency, leaving the bulkier items behind. She needed mobility, now more than comfort. With her knife, remaining cord, fire starter, and one last bundle of aromatic plants secured, she began moving laterally along the ridge, maintaining visual contact with the ascending Vorkath. The creature clearly recognized her retreat as intentional movement, rather than panicked flight. It adjusted its approach, angling to intercept her path, rather than following directly. Intelligent indeed, but that intelligence might be leveraged. Reaching the narrowed section of ridge, Arya quickly assessed the stability of the path. As she'd hoped, the underlying structure showed signs of erosion, loose soil, and fractured stone that might collapse under sufficient stress. She identified the weakest point and began her preparations, working with urgent precision. Using her knife and multi-tool, she excavated a shallow trench across the narrowest section of path, weakening its structural integrity while being careful not to trigger a collapse prematurely. She then positioned her remaining cord as a tripwire, anchoring it securely to the stable rock face on her side of the prepared section. The Vorkath was closing the distance rapidly, its powerful limbs eating up the terrain between them. Arya completed her trap, just as the creature reached the wider portion of the ridge. It paused briefly, studying her with predatory focus, then resumed its advance with deliberate intent. Arya crushed her last bundle of aromatic plants, releasing the pungent oils, and ignited them with her fire starter. The resulting flare of flame and smoke caused the Vorkath to hesitate momentarily, not in fear, but reassessment. It clearly recognized the fire as a potential threat, but seemed to calculate that its armored hide provided sufficient protection. Perfect. Arya needed it cautious but not deterred. She retreated beyond her prepared section, maintaining eye contact with the predator while positioning herself where she could activate the tripwire. The Vorkath resumed its approach, moving with more measured steps, but unwavering purpose. Timing would be everything. Too soon, and the creature might avoid the weakened section entirely. Too late, and she would be within its striking range when the trap deployed. The Vorkath reached the beginning of the narrowed path, Its massive form nearly spanned the available width, forcing it to adjust its gait to navigate the restricted space. It focused intently on Arya, predatory instinct temporarily overriding environmental awareness. Now, Arya yanked the tripwire taut, just as the Vorkath's weight settled on the weakened section. The creature's front limb caught the cord, disrupting its carefully balanced stride. Simultaneously, the compromised path structure began to give way beneath its considerable mass. For a crucial moment, the Vorkath froze in recognition of the danger, its intelligent mind processing the trap it had entered. That hesitation proved decisive. The weakened ridge collapsed beneath it, sending cascades of soil and stone into the ravine below. The predator's powerful limbs scrabbled for purchase, finding none as the entire section gave way. With a thunderous roar, equal parts rage and surprise, the Vorkath plummeted into the ravine, disappearing in a cloud of dust and debris. Arya didn't wait to confirm the outcome. She retreated quickly to a secure position, putting maximum distance between herself and the collapse point. Only when she reached stable ground did she pause to assess the situation. The dust was beginning to settle, revealing the aftermath of her trap. The narrow section of ridge had been completely obliterated, leaving a gap of several meters that would prevent the Vorkath from pursuing along the same path, even if it survived the fall. From her position, Arya couldn't see into the ravine itself, but the absence of movement or sound suggested the predator was either seriously injured or temporarily incapacitated. She allowed herself a moment of relief before pragmatism reasserted itself. The Vorkath might be neutralized for now, but the Dravorn pack remained in the area, and her primary camp had been compromised. She needed to establish a new secure position before nightfall. With renewed determination, Arya began making her way along the ridge, searching for suitable terrain to implement the lessons she'd learned over the past 2 days. She would survive this assessment, not just endure it, but master it. In the monitoring station, Captain Voss stared at the display in stunned silence. The human cadet had not only stood her ground against a Vorkath, but had effectively neutralized the apex predator using nothing but terrain knowledge and improvised tools. "Did you see that?" he subvocalized to Commander Lorath, forgetting protocol in his amazement. "Indeed." Lorath's tone carried rare appreciation. "Most unexpected. Continue monitoring. But I believe we have acquired sufficient data for the Council's evaluation. Should we extract her now? The assessment parameters have been exceeded." A pause. Then, "No. Let's see what else this human can show us. Maintain emergency protocols, but allow the assessment to continue unless direct intervention becomes necessary." Voss acknowledged the order, his perception of humanity undergoing a significant revision. Kane had demonstrated resourcefulness, tactical intelligence, and adaptability beyond anything he had anticipated. Perhaps these Deathworlders had more to offer the Alliance than anyone had realized. The final day of Arya's assessment passed without further major predator encounters. She established a new camp in a defensible cave formation higher on the ridge, implementing the security measures that had proven effective previously. The Dravorn pack maintained distance, apparently still unsettled by the Vorkath's presence in their territory despite its defeat. Arya used the relative calm to document her experiences and collect additional biological samples that might be valuable to the Academy's research division. Her analyzer identified several plant species with potential medicinal properties, and she cataloged behavioral observations of the smaller indigenous creatures. As sunset approached on the 3rd day, marking the completion of her assessment period, Arya allowed herself to truly relax for the first time since landing. She built a larger fire than usual and enjoyed the last of her food supplies while watching the strange constellations emerge in Epsilon 7's night sky. The extraction shuttle arrived precisely on schedule, descending into a clearing near her position with mechanical precision. Arya gathered her remaining equipment and made her way down from her camp. Despite the challenges, she felt a curious reluctance to leave. Epsilon 7 had tested her in ways no previous training had, and she had discovered capabilities within herself that might have otherwise remained dormant. To her surprise, Captain Voss himself emerged from the shuttle as she approached. "Cadet Kane," he acknowledged, his tall Arcarian frame silhouetted against the shuttle's lights. "Your extraction has arrived." "Thank you, Captain," Arya replied formally. "I'm ready to return to the Academy." Voss studied her for a moment, his alien features difficult to read. "Your performance during this assessment was noteworthy. The Council will be particularly interested in your encounter with the Vorkath." Arya maintained professional composure, though internally she wondered how much trouble she might be in for her unorthodox tactics. "I acted according to the circumstances presented, sir." "Indeed." Voss gestured toward the shuttle. "We will debrief fully upon return to the station. The commander is eager to hear your report." The journey back to the orbital station passed in silence, Arya using the time to organize her thoughts and prepare for the inevitable questioning about her decisions. She had completed the assessment successfully, survived the full 3 cycles, and gathered valuable data. But her methods had certainly deviated from standard protocols. Upon docking with the station, Arya was escorted directly to a conference room where Commander Lorath awaited. The Tellurian officer's crystalline features refracted the room's lighting as she turned to acknowledge Arya's arrival. "Cadet Kane," Lorath greeted her. "Please be seated. Your assessment data has been most illuminating." Arya took the offered seat, maintaining proper posture despite her fatigue. "Thank you, Commander. Captain Voss has provided a comprehensive monitoring report," Lorath continued, activating a holographic display that showed key moments from Arya's assessment. "I am particularly interested in your explanation for 2 specific incidents." The display focused on Arya's intervention with the juvenile creatures, showing her use of fire to distract the Dravorn pack. "You violated non-interference protocols," Lorath stated without inflection. "Explain your reasoning." Arya considered her response carefully. "The intervention provided valuable intelligence regarding Dravorn reaction to fire and novel stimuli. Commander, I judge the information gained to outweigh the protocol violation." "A convenient justification." Lorath's crystalline features shifted in what might have been skepticism. "The monitoring data suggests a more emotional motivation." "Permission to speak freely, Commander." "Granted. Humans evolved as social predators. Commander, protection of vulnerable individuals is deeply ingrained in our psychology. I could claim my response was purely analytical, but that would be dishonest." Arya met the Tellurian's gaze directly. "However, I maintain that my emotional response enhanced rather than impaired my tactical decision-making. The intervention was both compassionate and strategically sound." Lorath studied her for a moment before shifting the display to show Arya's encounter with the Vorkath. "And this? The Vorkath is classified as an endangered apex predator. Your actions may have resulted in serious injury to a protected species. With respect, Commander, the Vorkath presented an immediate threat to my survival. The Academy's assessment parameters prioritize cadet safety over environmental preservation in direct life-threatening situations." Arya gestured to the display. "I chose the minimum effective response. I could have attempted to kill the creature, but instead focused on creating distance and a terrain barrier." "A creative interpretation of the guidelines," Voss interjected, speaking for the first time since entering the conference room. "But not incorrect." Lorath's crystalline features shifted again, reconfiguring into what Arya had learned to recognize as thoughtful consideration. "Your assessment presents the Council with an interesting dilemma. Cadet Kane, your survival skills and tactical adaptability exceeded expectations, but your methods challenge our established protocols." "If I may, Commander," Voss said, The purpose of these assessments is to evaluate potential officers' capabilities under stress. Kane demonstrated exceptional resource management, environmental adaptation, and tactical innovation, all qualities the Alliance values. That her methods reflected her species' evolutionary psychology should be considered a feature rather than a flaw. Arya remained silent, surprised by the Arcarian captain's apparent support. Lorith considered this perspective. Your point has merit, Captain. The Alliance's strength lies in the diverse capabilities of its member species. She turned back to Arya. Cadet Kane, your assessment is officially classified as completed successfully. A full report will be submitted to the Council, including both commendations for your survival skills and notes regarding protocol deviations. Thank you, Commander. You are dismissed to medical for standard post-assessment evaluation. Captain Voss will provide you with the official documentation once processing is complete. Arya saluted and departed, feeling a complex mixture of relief, pride, and lingering concern about the Council's ultimate reaction to her assessment. After the medical evaluation confirmed she had suffered no significant physical effects from her time on Epsilon 7, Arya returned to her quarters to rest properly for the first time in 3 days. She had just begun to drift off when her communication panel signaled an incoming message. It was from Captain Voss, a copy of his official report to the Council. Arya scanned it quickly, her fatigue forgotten as she absorbed his surprisingly positive evaluation. The final section caught her particular attention. The human cadet's performance raises important questions about our integration protocols for Deathworld species. Kane demonstrated that traits we have considered potential liabilities, emotional responsiveness, improvisation tendency, and protective instincts, can become tactical advantages in appropriate contexts. I recommend the Council consider revising the Academy's training methodologies to better accommodate and utilize these characteristics, rather than attempting to suppress them. The Epsilon 7 assessment suggests humans may offer unique capabilities that complement rather than compromise Alliance operations. Attached was a personal note from Voss. Your actions changed my perspective, Cadet. Perhaps there is more to learn from Deathworlders than the Council has recognized. Well done. Arya smiled, setting the pad aside and finally allowing herself to truly relax. She had come to Epsilon 7 with something to prove, not just to the Academy or the Council, but to herself. The hostile moon had tested her in ways she couldn't have anticipated, forcing her to draw on every resource of body, mind, and spirit. She had survived. More than that, she had demonstrated that humanity's unique evolutionary heritage, forged on a world that the Alliance classified as too dangerous for most species, created strengths as well as limitations. The path to full integration into the Galactic Alliance would not be easy, but she had taken a significant step forward. As sleep finally claimed her, Arya's thoughts drifted back to Epsilon 7, to the strange beauty of its purple forests, the challenge of its predators, and the lessons learned beneath its orange sun. She had arrived as just another cadet from a Deathworld. She had departed as something more, a pioneer blazing a trail for her species among the stars. In the Council chambers, Captain Voss's report generated considerable debate. Some members viewed the humans' unorthodox methods with alarm, citing potential disruption to established protocols. Others saw opportunity in her adaptive approach, recognizing the potential value of perspectives shaped by Earth's uniquely challenging environment. The discussion continued for several cycles before reaching a significant conclusion. The Academy would establish a specialized training program integrating Deathworld perspectives into Alliance methodology. Cadet Kane would be invited to participate as both student and consultant once her regular training cycle completed. It was a small beginning, but a meaningful one. The Predator Pack had turned and fled, not just from a single human cadet, but from the conventional wisdom that had limited the Alliance's understanding of what different species could contribute. In facing Epsilon 7's challenges, Arya Kane had opened a door not just for herself, but for humanity's future among the stars.